Could Be Anywhere, a Thing's story, written and narrated by M. Dillon. Prologue. My name is Leo Childs, and I'm about to share with you my sliver of a fantastical story. Here is what I know. The world as we knew it is over, and if I have succeeded, no one will even notice. I have broken international laws and many of the commandments of heaven and hell in my part of a conspiracy to bend space and time. I have conspired to deceive the hands of fate because I disagree with the prognosis that humanity should be given up on. I have worked directly or indirectly for every imaginable group upholding law and order and a myriad of criminal organizations, as above, so below. I've witnessed the raw power of the conceived light of heaven and been the instrument of the dark hand of misery. I have tasted the first morning of death more times than I'd like to remember, and I have held all the power of the universe in my hand and chosen to recreate at its burden. I owe nothing. I own nothing. I am nothing. But if you're reading this, everything I have said above is a lie, and all that I now share is untrue. And if I failed, your thoughts will be the least of my worries. This is my part in the story of Johnny Fitz and the last days of the analog world. This could be anywhere in the stories of things of steel and wood. Chapter 1. An offer to a Nancy for safe passage through shadow, death, sex, and tears. Good morning. It was too early to be awake when Big Bobby Wilson was out checking on his outdoor crops. He scrambled down the side of the hill, following a trail invisible to the naked eye. He knew every foothold the slightest bit of weight on, and for a fat man, he was deeply proud of the way he still moved through the woods. The trail will take him through the bog, up a hill, and down to his little crop, tucked snugly into the creek side that ran behind the strip of trailer parks that hid from the eyes of tourists taking in the local sights. Animals habituated oddly, mammals, specifically goats, domiciled regularly. But that was not what filled his mind with dark thoughts of resignation. In his 30s, Bud had noticed that his internal monologue had taken on an almost conscientious observer role, equally full of question and judgment of the actions of the story's protagonist. He had resigned himself to needing to be out here this early to get down the road ahead of the local kids. The white trash hippie leftovers roamed the trailer park like a pack of wolves. Allowing himself to be seen coming out of the woods, obviously with the tools of non-taxable horticulture, was like dropping the gauntlet. They could easily go poking around in the woods all on their own. But if they saw him, they had to do something. It was the true nature of youth. He had lived a life close to the source of all of the world's darkest evil, and chose to drift along convincingly in a drunken haze. And that's when he saw her. He slid the slightest bit off the path and leaned against a tree. It was early fall, and the morning air was still damp with the chewable, moss-covered breath of the bog. Shadow, always vast in the creek beds, made it hard to trust what you saw. The invading sun chased away the darkness and cut the valley with sharp points of light. He didn't want to have to look again, but he had to be sure. He leaned over the big nurse log. He could see her clearly, legs in the air, head and torso underwater, trapped between the logs and the rocks. The period on the sentence of her story. His first thought was that she must be a jumper. They were just down from the old trestle bridge. He sighed and thought about things through his morning high. He didn't need this. Didn't need the smell of her on him. Didn't need the day spent explaining. And what, Mr. Wilson, were you doing at 6 a.m. trudging around in the woods on that shit creek side?
Well, you see, officer, I was looking for the meaning of life.
Perhaps you've seen it. I seem to have misplaced it. Number 1 crush. He was scared. He was always scared in her arms. Scared that she would never love him the way she did when they were young, and she believed in him. She moved him in the way she wanted him to move to get herself off. Totally in control. They had been here enough times for him to know the difference. He wondered if she used him because she could, if that's what actually got her off. He could tell by her changing of tempo that the dance is finishing, and they fall away from each other as inconsiderately as you might drop your robe at the pool. That's all she says. Did I fail to satisfy? His words, not a question or statement of condition, rather a mocking commentary used to protect old wounds. Oh, his lover. Her mocking tone gives the words as much weight as buoyancy. As their spheres of energy start to compete for air in the silent room, she reassembles herself for protection against the elements. Thanks. Say hi to your brother for me. The divorce. To the sentimental, there is nothing more terrifying than an empty apartment, especially in the awkward limbo space between owners, when the energy of the past knows its days are numbered. Our lives dictate where the dust settles, and our things dictate the overspray of life. They leave a reference in a room, the way the smoke of 30 years will visibly frame an armchair. Things, the treasures from a lifetime of endless garage sales, weekends spent floating the blind abyss of unwanted things, unfinished projects that rotted from the sweet fruit of best intentions. All gone now. Chris had the SOS ladies take it all away. He remembered seeing an email, a subject line he read in transit somewhere, and knew he couldn't have his thoughts taken to that place until he was ready. And why today he was ready, he was not sure. In 1987, his brother brought home a whole set of the World Book Encyclopedia. He thought it was like National Geographic and would have naked pictures in it. It didn't. Just the story of the world up until that year, like a hard copy of Wikipedia. Chris kept that. Must have thought it was worth money. Or maybe the SOS ladies wouldn't even take it. We don't make that effort anymore. At eye level, when you walked in the door, there was a mirror. He stared deep into the eyes of the all, affirmed that he came to mourn the things, to use them to make himself think, to make himself remember. He shrugged and sat back on one of the 2 IKEA chairs in the living room. He realized that tears were rolling down his cheeks. He was home.
Chapter 3. Nomenclature. This chapter looks at words and the changing role of language in our society. It represents a throwback to a dialect of English and the accepted nomenclature used in the early 90s. the words from a voice of a boy that was there. Offending words have been removed and replaced by a heuristic prop to allow you to self-prescribe your insult.
There are moments when we are the drivers in our lives. Buddhists call it Zen. Alcoholics, a moment of clarity. This is not one of those moments. Michael sat on the bench in the ice rink, waiting for the kids to show up. Chris Childs, the local pastor and all-around piece of shit, somehow persuaded him to volunteer to coach hockey. When Michael was a kid, Saturday morning community stick-and-puck was known as retard hockey, the community-sponsored team for kids who didn't have the money and or parental interest to play hockey. They got given ice time and donated equipment. Good-minded citizens thought the game might help them fit in. So in the name of Canadian socialism or some shit, retard hockey was the feel-good excursion and inclusion that signified the heights of progressive thinking in the 1980s. Everywhere Michael looked, he had a memory of fucking with guys. Violent 1980s small town that was almost encouraged by his all-star hockey status, smashing guys into the boards. He was fully aware, especially when he got into his preteens and teens, that something sexual in the action. Years ago, he admitted this to his couples therapist. Michael came out pretty much right after high school, but everybody always knew he was gay. He was outgoing. Some of his outgoingness he regrets now. He was aware that he might have made some of the guys, especially a couple of years younger and smaller than him, do things sexually that they probably wouldn't have agreed to if, say, he wasn't twisting their arms behind their backs. When his mom got sick, Michael had gone to see the pastor. His boyfriend, Eddie, had wanted him to talk to someone. The pastor in the church turned out to be this piece of shit he had grown up with, all grown up working for the church. It took a bit of shit talking to get to the point where Michael could kind of chill out and share how he was feeling. Chris's counsel was an incredibly self-serving mission from God. Coach Saturday morning hockey. Come play in the beer league. Find a place for yourself in this community as the man you are today. He cursed Chris now as he heard the words of coaches from his past materialize in his mouth, absorbed in this changing of identity. How tough can it be, he thought to himself. And all in all, it was working out. The kids listened as he checked their gear, split them into teams, and sat them on the bench. A smaller, skinny kid was ignoring all the directions, but Michael thought it best to just let the others find their way first. That maybe he would take the hint. When all the other kids were sitting in the team bench, and the boy was still shooting imaginary penalty shots, complete with victory lap, Michael gave it a shot.
Hey, buddy, come in and I put you on the blue team.
The boy maintained his veil of silence, approached the far net for another shot. Michael started to get mad. He felt the rising heat of anger in his stomach, looking at parents and kids for help.
Hey, seriously, man, come on. We want to start.
He started towards the kid, who just turned and skated away.
It's okay, Mr. Dodd,
one kid said.
he's retarded.
All the kids laughed, and Michael noticed that the kid got a bit of attention from the boy.
Okay, 5 on, switch goalies every period.
The other kids rushed towards the position. The boy seemed to acquiesce and started towards the benches. Michael was surprised, glowing with a small hint of achievement. His patience had paid off. Maybe he had this coaching thing all figured out. As the boy came down the right wing side of the bench, he diverted ever so slightly towards the boy who had called him a retard. It seemed to Michael they were talking or looking at each other, and the next thing he knew, the kid was slashing with swings reserved for harvesting wheat. Michael was moving with every bit of latent speed he could find. It had taken most of his 200 pounds to pull them apart. The crazy kid pulled himself away. "Don't touch me! Fuck you! Fuck off, faggot! Don't touch me!" Demon child screamed at Michael. The child screamed at Michael like a demon. He pulled himself free, threw his stick and hockey gloves down, and headed the long way across the ice, throwing off equipment. As he was swearing and calling out the other kids' names, a few of the other kids yelled back. A few of the parents did too. In the adjunct chaos, Michael was surprised, confused, and pissed off that only 2 parents came to help. But inside he was laughing and enjoying himself, and he knew that a few hours he would be recognizing the view from the eye of the hurricane as the product of showing up. Michael used a small burst of energy to dart across the ice close to the retreating boy and cut him off, spraying snow all over him. The boy was a ball of rage. Michael had never seen such hatred in a child or anybody's eyes before, and given that he had spent his whole life competing in combat sports, that was saying something.
Hey, slow down, Rambo.
Get the fuck away from me! I'm not saying sorry.
The kid sat down and started kicking off his skates in a threatening manner that kept Michael a good 6 feet away.
Fuck off!
Michael looked at his stunned flock, lost and unguided by his vacancy, as he tried to bring the one sheep back.
Well, man, you don't need to go. We can find a way to make it all work out.
In the time Michael had tried to adjust his posture, the kid had taken his skates off, lobbed them and his helmet at Michael. In the corner of his eye, Michael could see a woman carrying a coat and a pair of gumboots. Michael was aware that this was his out. The mother didn't make eye contact, but Michael could see that she seemed to have the saddest eyes in the world. Michael skated back to his shocked group, feeling relieved that the worst had to be over. As he skated across, he visualized choking Chris unconscious and violating him. This sort of toxic masculinity was healthy when he realized that these destructive thoughts were a coping mechanism created by Michael to protect himself and were not rational thoughts he would ever act on. He told himself that unconvincingly. I am the law. Paul had driven as fast as he could. He knew he wasn't going to get stopped because he knew that if Speed Patrol had been in the area, they would have pulled them off to deal with the DB. He was fantasizing about having to go to someone's door to tell them their son or daughter were dead. Must be a jumper, he told himself. The road only went up the hill to the old trestle bridge. It was too small to carry any of the larger trains in service now, but it was a picturesque landscape for the quiet passenger service. The second-generation Cedars had returned with a vengeance. The whole area had been clear-cut about a century before by men faced with a choice between forcing themselves on the woods or climbing back into the sea. The ancient Cedars stumps haunted the landscape like fallen giants of a bygone era. He stopped at Gerald Fitch's and picked up Buddy. Paul radioed the RCMP to update them on this status. Thanks. We're pretty slow going, probably a half an hour still. Please offer the supports you can to the witness, and please arrange hot lunch and coffee. Please try and maintain a perimeter, keep animals away if possible. Do not try to approach the area in which the possible remains are suspected to be. Paul looked at Buddy with the look of a toddler about to steal another kid's toy.
So, you were fishing?
Buddy nodded in the general direction, unwilling to share any details with Paul. The question drawled, full of innuendo and history. Buddy started to say something, then simply nodded and just let the silence hang there.
Where's your gear?
His tone dripped with contempt.
Fuck you, fake cop. I'm not wasting my breath on this.
Paul tried to plead a case for authority in the region.
Look, buddy, I'm just trying to help you get your story straight for the RCMP. You know I'm working for them on this.
Buddy cut him off. Try and maintain a perimeter. Get coffee. That's what they told you. Nobody said to pretend that you're a cop and do interviews, fucko. And when my son gets here momentarily with the fishing stuff in the truck, I'm gonna go smoke a big joint and wait till somebody on the radio gives me a 20 on the Bulls. I'd leave now if I wasn't so lazy. So make sure you pick up some good dessert, retard. The idea of the Wilsons fishing was as likely as them hunting a Bengal tiger in those marshes. But all the same, Paul also knew that they probably didn't have anything to do with any dead girl in the river. But if he had his way, he would get Buddy Wilson under some hot lights, make him go a couple hours without a smoke or water. Then he would share some of what he knew about what goes on in these woods. His thoughts were interrupted by his weight of reality. Buddy looked at him and took out a cigarette. You know what the shittiest part is, Paul? I've known your sniveling ass since T-ball. I call 'cause I find some dead girl in the river, and you want to play Columbo so bad you think I have something to do with it. That you would even act that way. You're a dumb shit. Paul's only response was,
You can't smoke in here.
Good, Buddy said, and got out of the van.
Vancouver, 1995. I was driving down Broadway, eastbound. I was stuck behind a number 17 bus and was looking for a post office box near a phone booth. I don't exactly know where that path was taking my life. I didn't exactly have a driver's license. I had one that was under the name Jonathan James with my picture on it, and it was real government issue ID. But still, the balance of action and consequence was never far from my mind. I'd stolen photocopies of birth certificate and social insurance cards from the office of the restaurant I was working in. They didn't really ask any questions when I had it replaced. Bob's your uncle. I'm JJ, glad to meet you. I was driving eastbound on Broadway. I had been paged. I'd been paged by Meds. Jason Mesterchenkov, my boss. Well, sort of. More of my partner, actually. Probably best understood as my ward. I was manny to a 250-pound Russian ex-KGB bear trader and favorite nephew of Donnie Mesterchenko, the real boss. And I was terrified. Donnie, did you know that in 1990, 1,100 people died getting out of bed? Just west of Ontario, I found a spot to pull over in front of a shop that sold cowboy boots and $300 jean jackets made exclusively from the authenticated recycled denim of underage Japanese girls. I used to carry a notebook and pen, but Donnie told me not to write anything down. I heard Matt's answer, come to the tire shop quickly. Then I called Donnie. He was laughing when he answered. I was driving a brand new 1993 Geo Metro that was a custom color in neon green that only existed for a few months in the early 90s before it was determined to be too hard on the eyes to take in that much color information while driving. I was assigned to drive Mets around and keep them out of trouble. If I distilled every Eastern European Russian henchman from every action movie or TV show that I watched as a Cold War latchkey kid, it still wouldn't have done Mets justice. 6'2", 250 pounds, he looked square like the ultimate warrior. The first time we met, I rushed out to Mission to pick him up from the bus station. He was supposed to take the bus all the way into Vancouver, but got kicked off for propositioning a woman with her children. He was wearing a pink and gray snakeskin suit, somewhere between a Miami Vice cut and something that the drummer for Poison might wear. Full-on matching pants and jacket with tassels, and he had a perfectly frosted tip mullet. His permanent 5 o'clock shadow seemed to connect with his back hair, and of course, he always present wraparound mirrored Ray-Bans.
Like Rufus.
He would always say. When I got to the bar, the locals were all cowered in one corner like a feral Wolverine had taken the place over. He walked up to me with a look on his face like he was thinking about pulling my head off my underdeveloped body and said,
My uncle, he say you're need to go over there, be charming, talk to him, make it all right. But Leon, do not owe him anything.
Donnie never specifically addressed his view on having Johnny owing you. The Ogre Brothers, as I call them, had been with Donnie since the old country, and I assumed there was some sort of family connection, but I was told no, that Divok and Yashid Organinsky were from Georgia and some different kind of Russian altogether. I told myself I needed to spend some quality time in the library to get a grip around the geography that came me to play with this job.
As the Soviet experiment was fading, it went insular. Those that displayed Western tendencies or sympathies, like protesting or crime, are listening to Motley Crue. When Boston hosted to the Western borders and influence, while loyal and proven Soviets were moved into the isolate hinterlands. The result was that those people that aided in the unsettling movements of the outgoing regime became the settling interests of the new regime. Criminals, being the most organized, were the best situated to develop a system for integration with the West. These far ahead of any revolutionary movements that made the bi-fractured former Soviet administrative governments. This led to the rise of the oligarchs. And this is how Donnie ended up in Eastern Germany running the state transport company that transferred him to YER.
In the early 90s, Kretchen led 50,000 displaced Russians from East Germany settled in the hinterlands north of Fort St. John. What could happen?
Just received in our news.
I drove into the tire store, son was a rickshaw in the noonday sun. The lot was empty. I wasn't sure how long it had been since this had been an operable business. There were a few derelict cars and an old motorcycle in one of the tire bays. The office door was locked up, and from a distance it looked to be in squalor like the rest of the place. We walked up the stairs and out of the sunlight into the moldy, dark apartment above. It was sparsely furnished, much like a warehouse office. Coffee maker, toaster, and a few accoutrements told me that it got used from time to time as a flop house, but that didn't look like anyone actually lived here. In the living room, there was a TV, a bit off in one corner, with a Sega console hooked up to a paused game. The usual beer cans and pizza boxes that followed groups of men up all night up to no good. I went to the front of the apartment and windows were all open, and the second-story window was almost parallel with the street from a certain angle. At some point, this must have been a great part of town, but now...
Daytime hookers.
Mets pointed at two fairly rough, but not totally destitute middle-aged women dressed a bit like trashy waitresses, standing thoughtfully out of the way up the bend, allowing interested suitors to veer off to an alley to make their acquaintance.
Nice neighborhood.
I realized Met saw this as a selling point. He wasn't joking when he said,
I want this apartment.
I wasn't sure whom it was who lived there before, but from that point forward, this is where Metz lived. To the right was a bedroom, the door was open, and I could see the man, sitting smoking on a small kid's bed with no sheets. The headboard was a faded red plastic, and the stickers that had verified its automobile portrayal had long ago been lost with someone's childhood. I wondered how bad it was to grow up living above a tire store in a place used to store, assess, and fence stolen goods. The guy didn't seem too worse for the wear. He was a bit swollen around the eyes and mouth, but he wasn't beaten to a pulp. He had boxer shorts on and a dress shirt, and he had no pants on, and one leg looked bandaged with toilet paper. He only had one shoe on, and the foot was bandaged the same way. He wasn't tied up or anything. He made eye contact, and I had no idea what the man had done or why. And I had no feeling of curiosity. Stay in the moment. Who the fuck are you? He asked me. Metz laughed. He's the fucking busboy. He's here to clean up when I cut off your fucking toe. Metz motioned down to his foot, and I was able to piece together that I got to this party way too quick to simply be here to clean up. And then
Chapter 5. Things of Steel and Wood. Things of Steel and Wood was not like any other guitar store. It wasn't like any other store I had ever seen. You really had to go out of your way to find the place. It was tucked away in the penthouse of one of the 13 old run-down par and fee hotels on Granville Street. A simple sign, a one-word prompt, Things, led the way to the elevator. When you came into the front of the store via the old elevator, there was a man cage, a 6x6 steel enclosure that offered to protect visitors from a very unhappy tiger. It was always open, but its new and impressive construction undermined the illusion of mausoleum-like neglect. The store was an emporium of the unknown musical history of the city. It was impossible to tell what was for sale and what was a priceless museum piece. But of course, Johnny would tell you that it was all for sale. Records from artists dating back to the 1930s enshrined various guitars and amps. The display case mixed guitar effects pedals with time-capsuled novelties and a tray of high-end timepieces. There were guns and swords, even an authentic-looking Tommy gun hanging on the wall. Where the front counter should be, there was a deluxe-looking espresso machine on a slick chrome cart beside a wooden liquor cart that wouldn't be out of place. Where the front counter should be, there was a deluxe-looking espresso machine on a slick chrome cart beside a wooden liquor cart that wouldn't be out of place, being wheeled room to room on a paddle boat going down the Mississippi around the turn of the century. As the desire for a cup of coffee filled my mind sufferably, Johnny stepped forward like the promenade officer on a day cruise. It was like I was expected. Johnny was hobo chic. He wore all black in a timeless way. Depending on the light, he could have come out of a high-end department store or be homeless in Calcutta. And under the smell of booze and smoke, he smelled like brimstone and licorice, like 1,000 nights spent chasing the wind. When Johnny spoke to me, it was like the whole world had melted away.
Leo, right? Coffee? Something stronger? Welcome to Lotus Land. You're right on time. As you might be able to tell, some of us are still chasing away the stubborn remainders of last night.
Yeah, hi. It's JJ, actually. I corrected nervously. And, yeah, coffee would be wonderful. There was a mixed crowd. Partiers from the night before mingled with a group of obvious roadie-type gear geeks, huddled around a full stack of Rivera knucklehead guitar amps. The stark black and steel structures stood about 6 feet high, while a mist-cast droid-sized rack of guitar gear beeped encouragingly. Johnny smiled, tipped his hat, and spoke.
All rightly, Senator JJ. Welcome to Friday mornings at Things of Steel and Wood. This morning, as most mornings go, we are seeking to crown each day with a perfectly unique guitar sound. This morning, we are in sonic contemplation of the life-changing gain structures of the modern 90s guitar amp. We're just giving this rare Rivera.
She said to me, I talk to the dead, texting my friends, but my face is sad. Psychic, if you please, don't talk to the dead, let me rest in peace. Get out of my head. Once I'm in heaven, I'm already uploaded to the clouds. Captured with angels, and she thinks God is a clown. likes. She wants the world to know of her psychic skills. It's all for show. She talks to me in her tweets. She sees me on her social feed. She hears me through wiretaps guaranteed. She knew me before I was
You got me? See, the guitar thing is a part of a bigger thing that usually involves a sort of outreach to the more private things bothering humanity. A few years back, a friend from Kosovo had a sister trying to get money out of the former Yugoslavia. But how? It was dangerous to travel with cash, and the customs people on both sides were looking for jewelry. So they were in Berlin, and I know a guy there from back in the day. I made a deal with him for a super nice 1960s Vox, mint like from the factory. I would have kept it for myself. Things sounded like it came from the very hand of God. Now, it isn't always as straightforward as all that. Eventually it comes along that someone thinks they can beat the house. They can just take something for nothing and assume that it is all kosher. So my little system works because I always have buyers and sellers. I'm not trying to gouge any poor fucker escaping a genocide. But our socialist brothers don't understand, nor respect, nor are they willing to feel bound by the finer points of capitalism, the specialization of the market economy, and the choice that dictates the ritual. They are like ogres in the court of Babylon. You can't abide by the tenets of philosophy's absence from your source code. They don't see choice, they see a chance to impose force, very dangerous in democracies as civil as Canada. They just saw buy guitar, take plane, sell guitar, force silly girly man to pay, fix it with a hammer. But you know, that's how they won the Cold War. So they showed up with a decent guitar, but it's not worth $6,000 offered in our original transaction to Requiet post-transit. And they can show me the receipt and tell me their story, which is great, but that's their story, not mine. They should be able to go to any shop in town and get the money the wood is worth. As I told them, the deal we had on the table evaporated with the purchase of said Stratocaster and the subsequent forgery of its purchase papers. And kid, I'm not in the business of being shook down by every deposed army grunt who thinks he can get a fake receipt from his mother's cousin and show up here demanding money. I mean, shit, you give me $500 and I'll write you a receipt for buying poor Seamus's soul. He motioned to the scruffy-headed blonde sweeping up broken glass beside a girl who looked to be drinking absinthe. I tried to laugh and shoved the receipt back in my pocket. But shit, what is a soul worth in Bill Clinton's America? Just chill and enjoy the party for a bit, and we will figure out something that lets you gain a little ground with your friends. You can owe me. I was dejected by my failure to win Johnny's influence, so I chose to engage him. Well, if you're not interested in the guitar, how much for my soul? I'm kind of hard-pressed to get results here. Johnny just laughed, laid back his head, and looked at me. Oh, Leo, what makes you think there's any value in your soul? I was dejected by my failure to win Johnny's influence, so I chose to engage him. Well, if you're not interested in the guitar, how much for my soul? I'm kind of hard-pressed to get results here. Johnny just laughed, laid back his head, and looked at me. Oh, Leo, what makes you think there is any value in your soul? conversation seemed to plunge the room into darkness, and I felt a little off balance. I slumped into one of the open stools and tried to regain my composure. "So hang out. Somebody get my serious little friend a drink or some drugs or something. He's like wound way the fuck too tight, and he just found out. And he just found his..." "So hang out. Somebody get my little friend a drink or some drugs or something. He's just wound way the fuck too tight. And he just found out his 59 Les Paul is a Kramer striker." Hours had passed. As time faded, Johnny was right beside me. The booze and the joints had gone to my head, and I had started to doze off. When I came out of it, the place had all but cleared out. The place had all but cleared out. Johnny was touching my arm. I had worn out my welcome. I started to try and explain myself. He laughed a little laugh and motioned me to stop. "It's all good, man. Let life come to you. The wood will tell me everything I need to know." He flipped the case open, inches, but the undeniable Gibson Rouge seemed to light up the room. He closed the case. He opened it again, looked at the guitar, smiled, and closed the case again. The ins and outs of it need not bother you. He opened it again, looked at the guitar, smiled, and closed the case. Smiled and closed the case again. He flipped the case open, inches, but the undeniable Gibson Rouge seemed to fill up the room. He closed the case. He opened it again, looked at the guitar, smiled, and closed the case again. "I am assuming you don't really understand how commodities work. The ins and outs of it need not bother you, but what does matter is the term known as self-liquidating. This," he said, motioning to the case, "is something I need to think about. Come back tonight at 10. I need to get my nap in and think about this thing you've gone and done here. And dress nice. You'll be taking me on the town." Stuck in the middle with you, ear cutting and all. Paul could feel the pride dying inside his chest as he drove up the highway towards a day spent cleaning up after the real cops. "Did you get enough coffee? More cinnamon buns?" He could hear himself swallowing ass. Driving through town, Paul didn't recognize the place anymore. It was all big box stores or vanity retirement projects. It wasn't 9 yet, so no hope of getting Barry to start looking through CTV footage. Paul called ahead and ordered an assortment of breakfast foods. The Roadhouse had gone through more than a few facelifts over the years. Now it was one bad weekend away from being replaced by an IHOP or a Denny's. He pushed the button on the steering wheel to call his office and leave a message. He heard his angel's voice. "Hello, you've reached the message of Island Carpet Cleaners, home of the 2 rooms and a hall for $49.95. He left a message. "Barry, I need you to call me the fucking second you get this." Barry was sitting in the office. He had slept on the couch. He had come back here around 4 a.m. to do exactly what Paul was going to ask him to do, which was to go over the CTV footage from all the cameras that Paul had set up around town. Some legally, but some in public areas were kind of illegal, ignored by City Hall to avoid arguing with Paul at the city council meetings he attended with a fervor. Barry was fat. His mama was fat and his daddy had been fat. Even his dog Frisbee was fat. Barry's life had been average for Canadians born in the mid-70s under the poverty line and designated legally as an Indian. His dad was a good man. He had passed away nearly a decade ago of diabetes, and in his time he tried with what he knew. Sure, he had shot at Barry a couple of times, and Leo a whole lot more. But reserve life in the 80s was a thing, and somehow, because of an Ozzy Osbourne t-shirt, his family ended up unofficially adopting Leo Childs. Barry had worked for Paul and Angel for over 10 years. He and Angel worked at the carpet place before Paul bought it. Barry had worked for Paul and Angel for over 10 years. He and Angel worked at the carpet cleaning place before Paul bought it. Barry built his elementary school's first computer. Barry and Leo spent their childhood convinced that Matthew Broderick was sending them secret missions in the rewound scramble of VHS transmissions. War games and computer hacking were primitive pastimes in those days, but the trouble him and Leo got in ordering bomb-making supplies from Radio Shack pissed a lot of people off when they stopped delivering to the reserve. But Barry guzzled Pepto and wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched a clear video of him and Sean driving his little piece of shit Subaru out of the Circle K parking lot. But Barry guzzled Pepto and wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched a clear video of him and Sean driving his little piece of shit Subaru out of the Circle K parking lot with Charlotte Dion sitting between them.